Hello once again. Welcome to another Crime Dive. My name is Crystal Sky, and if you're anything like me, you find yourself drawn to true crime cases. So that's what I talk about. If you like true crime and you want to feel better about your makeup skills, you should totally like, subscribe, and come hang out with me every Tuesday, where I take a deep dive look into a true crime case while slapping on the old clown paint. I really hope the humming of my computer in the background going. I am actually editing a video right now, so I really hope the humming of my computer in the background isn't too noisy for ya. Actually getting ready to go on a spontaneous trip for a few days, so yeah, I'm like filming videos back to back and editing and trying to like stay ahead. So sorry if there's like a hum in the background. Now, today's case is very, very interesting, alright? Today's case was a very, very big case in the area in which it occurred, the Sacramento area, Sacramento, California. And I stumbled across this case and was just really enamored? I don't know, fascinated with the subject of today's case. Today, we are talking about Michelle Cummiskey, who was the murderer known as Batgirl. Yeah, that was the moniker the press dubbed her. And this chick is just very fascinating. And if this was a, fictional story we were talking about, you might almost root for her a little bit, you know what I mean? But we are talking about, of course, a true crime case, which means that it did happen and she actually murdered someone, and not just murdered someone in a gruesome, terrible way, but for simple greed, for his car, for his Mercedes. And yeah, I don't know. Today's case is just a wild one, and yeah, wanted to talk about it with y'all. Disclaimer wise, again, we are talking about graphic description of a crime scene, and we are dealing with heavy drug use. Michelle was a heavy drug user, so yeah, and then she was also an escort, so we will be, talking about that kind of stuff. Just, FYI. Alright, without further ado, let's talk about Batgirl. So, Michelle Cummiskey. She was born March 8th, 1971 in New Liberty, Iowa. She was a very beautiful girl, alright? She was very tall. She was 5'9", had green eyes, strawberry blonde hair, had a very extroverted, charismatic personality, and she was also very athletic. She played on volleyball in high school and also participated in theater. Now, there's not a whole lot of nitty-gritty details about Michelle's childhood, her upbringing, alright? There's little scarce things that we know here and there, which I of course will share with you. But yeah, we don't know nitty-gritty details. Records do indicate that she attended school in Alburnett before she attended Harding Junior High School, and this was in Cedar Rapids in August of 1983. She then went to Northwest Junior High School, and this was in Coralville. And here she played on the volleyball team and sang on the choir. Now, under all of her yearbook pictures at this school, Michelle's name is spelled with one L. Michelle then went on to attend Iowa City High School. Then, in March of 1986, she was enrolled in Franklin Junior High School. So yeah, she attended quite a few different schools, and of the school officials who could actually remember Michelle, they said that she did not exhibit any behavioral problems, which would foreshadow how her life would turn out. So even though her school life seemed to be kind of normal, her home life was very unstable. Michelle's parents divorced when she was about 5 years old, and some sources said that Michelle lived with her father, and his name was Phil Von Kosman, and she also lived with her brother. Now, Michelle's relationship with her father was described as not being very good, so much so that at 14 years old, Michelle actually left her father's home to go live with her mother, who was married to another man at that time. Now, I did read another source. It was actually an interview with Michelle's dad, and he actually said that Michelle spent a majority of her childhood living with her mother up until she was about 14 years old. And that's when she spent a few months living with her father before going back to live with her mother. So yeah, not sure if Michelle did spend a majority of her childhood with her mother like her father claims, because there are other sources that said the opposite, but either way, not long after being with her mother, again at 14 years old, Michelle ran away from home. And to this day, it is said no one really knows why. Now, there were rumors that there was something going on between Michelle and her stepfather, whether that was physical abuse, sexual abuse, or something like that, not sure. That was just what the rumor was. Now, after running away from her mother's home, Michelle, she hitchhiked her way to Florida. And there, she started her life on the streets. Michelle would spend the next 5 years of her life doing sex work. She would also strip and dance and pretty much do whatever she could to earn money. And as a result of this lifestyle, Michelle ended up living all over the country. So including Florida, Michelle also spent time in Hawaii, New York, Illinois, Phoenix, LA, and Reno, Nevada. And along the way, at some point, Michelle developed a nasty drug habit, doing LSD and cocaine. Now, through her years of working on the streets, Michelle learned to use her looks, her charm, her personality to lure in lots and lots of men, who she then used to further her lifestyle. And Michelle was very good at what she did. Like, I cannot emphasize enough how good Michelle was at this game. It said that she just really had this like charm and charisma about her, and coupled with, her looks, all of this was just a perfect lure for men, especially servicemen, which Michelle really, really likes servicemen. She would tell her friends that she really loved going to towns where military bases were. And yeah, for whatever reason, Michelle just loved bringing in servicemen. Michelle just thought that military men were just very easy pickings for her. And she would just always go on and on about just how much she loved military men. They were far from home. Many of them were lonely. And they had money that they didn't know what to spend on. And Michelle used all of these factors to just con and charm her way into their lives and wallets. Because at the end of the day, all Michelle cared about was money. She did not care about the men in her life. They were just marks to her. Michelle did end up getting married. She married her first husband, a California businessman named Jade Cabadine. And the relationship was described as not being healthy or normal. And before she was even officially divorced from Jade, Michelle would go on to marry a second man, Army serviceman Jason Rush. And she met Jason in Honolulu when she was stripping at a strip bar. That marriage was also not healthy, nor a long one. In fact, there's like some suspicious circumstances in Jason and Michelle's marriage. So not long after getting married, not long at all, Jason started getting mysteriously ill and sick. He was so ill and so frequently, even his CO, his commanding officer, noticed, and he ordered Jason to go to the hospital and get checked out. So he was tested at the hospital, and a CID report came back with the possibility that Jason was being poisoned, and the suspicions were on his new wife, Michelle. So in this report, there's an alleged witness who claims that they witnessed Michelle putting decon rat poison in Jason's food. Another suspicious factor was that almost right after getting married, Michelle had Jason up his life insurance policy. And soon after finding out all of these things, military investigators started asking Jason, like, do you even know who your wife is? What do you know about her? They asked him if he even knew his wife's real name. They asked him if he knew anything about her first marriage, and that did he know that she was technically still married. And though Jason did not know these things about his wife, he still denied that Michelle had anything to do with him feeling ill. He did not think that Michelle was poisoning him. However, as soon as military investigators started sniffing around Michelle and started asking her questions, she just up and left Honolulu. Just up and left one day, and she went back to her home state of Iowa. And then she headed to Reno, Nevada. Now, I wasn't sure if it was with Jade or Jason, but she did leave one of those marriages in a 450 SL Mercedes. Like, she literally just like took the car and like up and left one day. And I'm not clear if the car was even hers or her husband's. And by the way, at this point, Michelle is only 20 years old. Yeah, she's only 20 years old. Everything that I just described to you right now up to this point, she's only 20 years old when she heads to Reno, Nevada. Yeah, 20 years old. See what I mean? How like if this was like a fictional show, like this, she would be like a fascinating character, you know? But fortunately, this is real life, and she makes some real life, real dumb decisions. So at 20 years old, with 2 ex-husbands, Michelle headed to Reno, Nevada, and she ended up working at the infamous Mustang Ranch. And she worked here for a couple of years. Now, the Mustang Ranch, it's the notorious legal brothel run in the state of Nevada, and it was run by mobster Joseph Conforti. Now, Michelle was described as not getting along with a lot of the girls there. However, Michelle absolutely excelled at her job at the ranch, though. Like, excelled. Like, we're talking, like, employee of the month, employee of the year status, all right? Maybe that's one of the reasons she didn't get along with some of the girls. See, Michelle was very, very popular. Like, very popular with clients. She was getting vastly more clients compared to the rest of the girls and was so popular. Clients specifically came to the ranch to request Michelle. And Michelle was just super, super popular. Which, again, that's probably why some of the girls didn't really like her, right? You know, they were pretty competitive. And Michelle was just knocking it out of the park. And I was a little confused on if Michelle was like 18 years old when she started at the ranch and she ended up there for a couple of years, or if she was 20 years old and ended up there a couple of years. I was a little confused on the timeline. But yeah, needless to say, she's very, very young. And yeah, just killing it at her job at the ranch, guys. Like, killing it. I read some sources that said Michelle was trying to pass herself off as 27 years old at this time. And yeah, she's killing it. She's showing up these other girls that have been there for a while, you know, and according to the other girls at the ranch, you know, Joe Conforti, the mobster who ran the ranch, it is said that Michelle was his, quote, number one girl. In fact, there's like a pretty infamous photo of Joseph Conforti, like, I guess he's like out on the town or whatever, and Michelle is on his arm. She would go out with him quite often on the town. Like, yeah, she was just killing it. Her boss loved her, her clients loved her, although, yeah, a lot of the girls did not. Now, at the same time that she's working at the ranch and killing it, Michelle kept an apartment of her own in Citrus Heights, and this was a suburb in Sacramento, California. And out of this apartment, Michelle would do escort service. Michelle decorated her apartment in her aesthetic, which was like rubber bats, vampire posters and books, a Batman keychain, Batman merch including a Batgirl poster, a book called The Devoured, where the cover has like a woman with vampire things, and like a bat necklace. And Michelle had gotten herself a few tattoos at this point as well. She had gotten herself a ring of bats flying on her upper arm, her left arm, and they were like circling as if they were like escaping out of like a belfry or something. And she also had vampire marks tattooed on her neck, complete with like blood droplets. Apparently what I'm trying to get at is Michelle really liked bats. She really loved like that whole like vampire aesthetic. Like that was her thing. Now apparently Michelle would tell her friends that she was a Satanist. But some wondered if it was maybe just not like a persona that Michelle was putting on. Now I've already mentioned before, but I really just need to emphasize just how good Michelle was at her game, alright? At her escorting game. I mean, both at the ranch and on her own. Like when she was escorting out of Sacramento, she had like specific areas that she targeted because she knew that was where like her prime target audience was. She was very, very good. So I actually found like a podcast / like video interview with one of the detectives on this case. He was like talking about just how extraordinary Michelle was in this game. He was talking about how a lot of people who sink into this lifestyle, you know, something eventually happens where, you know, they get out of it, you know, whether it all like becomes too much, whether they OD or go to prison, like they just make mistakes, they spiral and they like hit rock bottom. And, you know, for whatever reason, they end up out of the game, especially for very, very young children who start off in this life very, very young, like Michelle. But he described that that's what made Michelle unique in that respect, is that, you know, she started at 14, all right? And she was able to do this successfully for like 6-7 years, you know? And she also had a drug habit, but she was so good at her game. And he was saying that's what made her so unique, is that she didn't spiral out. She got better at her game as she got older and started realizing what she had at her disposal to, you know, con people, her charm, her charisma, her extroverted personality and nature, you know? And she got way better as the years went on. And yeah, he was just saying like it was really amazing that she was able to live this long in that kind of lifestyle without something catastrophic happening to her. And yeah, not only was she just charismatic and extroverted, Michelle, she was not a stupid girl, all right? She had a couple of brain cells to put together. She was not dumb. Michelle was so good at this game that she could choose who she wanted as clients. Like, that's how good she was. Like, she could decide who she would and would not have as a client. And according to investigators, there were literally hundreds of men, guys. Hundreds. And all across the country, mind you. Many even, like, wrote her love letters. And Michelle, not only did she keep all these letters, she kept her own meticulous records, all right? She had her own method of keeping track of who her clients were and whatnot. Like, she had super thick ledgers and notebooks that just had, like, notes and dates and transactions of clients. Like, it was amazing. And it just had all kinds of information about all of her clients, their names, their numbers, what money she got from them, maybe a comment or two about their sexual performance. And she had stacks and stacks of these men's business cards. It is said that Michelle thought of herself first and foremost as a businesswoman, and she prided herself on her bookkeeping. She prided herself on these ledgers. And I guess what makes Michelle super unique in the escorting world is that she would contact these men again. That's why she held on to their information. And guys, let's remember, man, like, this is pre-internet days, all right? Pre-social media, pre-OnlyFans, pre-texting, and, you know, you really had to work to stay in contact with people, but, you know, Michelle did it. She prided herself on, her clientele and just, like, her whole business acumen. It was pretty amazing. And Michelle also went by a pseudonym when she was doing this escorting service. She went by the name Jade Cabading, and her other aliases, including Jade Cummiskey and Julie Nelson. Now, we're going to talk a little bit about one of Michelle's clients. His name was Philip H. Inhofer, and he was a retired Air Force veteran. He was actually a master sergeant, and he had served in Korea, Vietnam, and Thailand during his tenure in the service. He was recently divorced when he met Michelle, divorced from his second wife. He was a square dancing enthusiast, and he lived in a mobile home park in the North Natomas area of Sacramento, which I guess it was like a nice mobile home park, but at the time, I don't know if it's still this way, I think the neighborhood's a little more developed now, but at this time, it was a very isolated, dark, rural area of the city. Philip worked at the nearby McClellan Air Force Base. He worked as a civil servant, which I guess a lot of veterans did, and Philip had just moved back to the Sacramento area in order to be closer to his son and his family, and that was his now grown son, Henry. Now, one of Philip's most prized possessions that he had was his red 1975 Mercedes-Benz 450 SL. It was a sport coupe, and that was his most prized possessions. He was so proud to have it. Now, Philip did Philip did struggle with alcohol abuse. He also struggled with loneliness, and it is said especially after his second divorce, he really kind of backed away from his social life, like square dancing and stuff. It was just seemed to kind of going through about a depression. And Philip, he eased his loneliness by calling escort services. And he would also visit the Mustang Ranch. And when he was 58 years old, Philip met 19-year-old Michelle Cummiskey. And this was around like December 1990 / like January 1991. It was around that time where the two met. He had been introduced to her by one of her friends at the ranch, one of the other girls, which that was kind of weird because I didn't think that she had any friends at the ranch, but you know, there also are going to be those girls who are actually going to see the advantage of having, you know, the number one girl as their friend, right? So she probably did have a few friends. But yeah, this girl had introduced Philip to Michelle, and yeah, Philip was immediately entranced. Michelle quickly became his favorite call girl. And yeah, it said that he just fell for her upon first sight, like love at first sight. Michelle, she fell for Philip's red Mercedes. So the two struck up a relationship of sorts. Well, it was a relationship to Philip. He was just another Mark to Michelle. So Philip ended up spending lots and lots of money on Michelle. He bought her nice things, paid off her bills, you know, the usual thing that you would expect from this kind of arrangement, right? He had even gotten rid of his dog because Michelle said that he didn't like it, and so he had actually gotten rid of his dog for her. And yeah, Philip just really, really cared for Michelle. He was just head over heels for her. And Michelle led Philip to believe that she cared for him too. Apparently, Philip would tell his coworkers at the base about his girlfriend, and he talked about how his girlfriend might move in with him. Now, Philip never, ever introduced or even mentioned Michelle to his son Henry and his daughter-in-law Julie. They were completely unaware that Philip participated in like escort services and stuff. Like, they knew that he struggled with loneliness, but they had no idea that he had, you know, frequented call girls and escort services and stuff. They just knew that he struggled with loneliness. Julie said, quote, "He was a very lonely guy. This was a part of his life he did not share with us." Now, over the next several months, like the next couple months or so that Philip and Michelle know each other, Michelle started inquiring Philip about his Mercedes. And And finally, after beating around the bush, she straight up told Philip that she wanted his Mercedes. She really liked it, and she wanted it. Now, Philip did not give Michelle the Mercedes. Like, he was just like, well, I can't. Although, Henry did say that not long before the events of today's case, Philip did ask him what he thought his Mercedes would be worth, which I guess was just very out of the ordinary, very unusual, and it was just kind of like random when he brought it up. So some wonder if maybe Philip wasn't at least contemplating it, you know? Now, Michelle, she wasn't gonna let Philip's reluctance stop her from getting her Mercedes, alright? She openly told the other girls at the ranch that she was going to, quote, get my Mercedes. Yeah, get my Mercedes. Now, you're probably wondering, like I was at this point, where I was just like, wait a minute, she's like this super successful escort, you know, call girl. Isn't she making like baller money, especially being the number one girl? Yes, she was making really good money at this time, like really good money. However, her money was going to support her drug habit. LSD was apparently her favorite drug and her drug of choice, but it is said that like if cocaine or anything else was around, that she would do that too. But LSD was her favorite. Now, Michelle did have a car of her very own. It was a Dodge Daytona, but on one of her trips to go see Philip, I guess she had wrecked it. Like, she didn't get in a wreck with someone else. I believe it was a solitary accident. Like, it was just her car. I guess she was on like a snowy hilltop or something, and she lost control and like careened and struck the side of the road. And yeah, she just like up and like left the car, abandoned it with like everything inside and everything. She just like left and started walking down the road, and she was picked up. But yeah, she just left everything there. Like, that just kind of like, she did not really have a concept of like the value of $1, you know what I mean? She just like brazenly went through money and possessions. So not only would Michelle brag about getting her, quote, her Mercedes, she would also brazenly talk about how she would murder Philip. She even asked one other girl if she wanted to help her. She was like, yeah, why don't you come with me? And we could like overpower him. And like, while you're talking to him, I can come up behind him and wrap a plastic bag around his head. Now, the girl, of course, thought like Michelle was like nuts and didn't really take her seriously. One time in January, Michelle told a friend, this friend's name was Dana Outland, and she told Dana how she had met a customer and she was going to kill him, and that she was also going to take his Mercedes. And Dana, of course, did not take Michelle seriously. On another occasion, she told Dana, after ingesting a lot of LSD, that she was going to poison, quote, the client's food. And she asked Dana to take her to the store so that she could buy rat poison. Now, like I said, neither Dana or any of the other girls at the ranch, they never took Michelle seriously at all when she would talk about this plan of killing a client with rat poison for his Mercedes. They never took her seriously. And apparently Michelle was known for being a pathological liar and just making up like bizarre, outrageous stories. So nobody believed her. Apparently she told some of the girls at the ranch that she had killed her first husband, and she'd done it by dropping a radio in the bathtub while he was like showering or taking a bath or something. But yeah, both Jade and Jason were alive and well. Now let's go to the date, March 4th, 1991. Dana picked up Michelle from the ranch, because remember, Michelle had wrecked her car, so she didn't have her Daytona anymore. So Dana picked Michelle up from the ranch, and she drove Michelle to Sacramento. Michelle had 4 suitcases. Michelle had told the girls at the ranch that she was going to be gone for good, that she was going to go to Miami. This is the place that she said that she would always go and take her money and go live her life. However, I read one source that said Michelle was actually fired from the ranch for possession of marijuana. But either way, Michelle was leaving the ranch. One of the other girls said that she had even seen Michelle type out a fake birth certificate, but she did tell the girls that before she was going to Miami, she was going to, quote, get my Mercedes. On the day that Dana picked Michelle up, Michelle repeated her request for Dana to stop by the store so she could pick up rat poison. The two stopped at a Target, and Michelle proceeded to ask one of the employees that if you put decon, rat poison, in someone's food, like, would it have any type of like reaction? And the employee was like, well, yeah. Now, once they arrived at Phillips, Michelle introduced Dana, and the three hung out for a little bit. But before Dana left, she managed to steal 2 of Philip's rings, and she would end up pawning them the next day. This left Philip and Michelle alone. The next day, Tuesday, March 5th, 1991, Michelle and Philip spent the day together. They went shopping, seemed to have a good time. Philip bought Michelle clothes and all kinds of stuff. Afterwards, they came back to Philip's home, and I think at some point he discovered that Dana had stolen from him, and I know him and Michelle did have some kind of argument because of this. But by that evening, it had resolved itself. Now, the two did have sex at some point, and Philip then decided to take a shower. Now, according to investigators, when he's in the shower, that's when Michelle entered the restroom. And with 2 knives, she tore through the shower curtain and proceeded to stab Philip over and over. Now, as Philip was being stabbed, he managed to get out of the shower and keep his arms, outstretched and up in a defensive position. And he did manage to step out of the shower and out of the bathroom. And he did try to lunge towards Michelle, and he eventually did make it to the living room. All the while that this is going on, guys, Michelle is continuously stabbing Philip over and over. Finally, Philip did go down, but even that wasn't enough for Michelle. She kept stabbing him over and over. She even broke off one of the knife blades in Philip's collarbone, and she just left the blade there. And then she continued stabbing with the second knife. I'm unclear if she went into the bathroom with 2 knives in her hands, or if it was 1 knife and then when that first knife broke off, she went and got a second one and came back and continued. I was a little confused about that part, but 2 knives were used. Michelle ended up stabbing Philip 32 times, but even that wasn't enough. Michelle then grabbed an aluminum baseball bat and started repeatedly beating Philip's head. In fact, a neighbor who lived across the street, they said that at around midnight, they saw that Philip's lights were still on, and they kept hearing this thump, thump. And their knee-jerk assumption was that oh, he must be lifting weights and he's dropping them on the floor when he's done with his rep, because that's what it sounded like to them, That's how loud and intense Michelle's attack on Philip was. Then the neighbor said that Philip's lights went off and the sound stopped. Michelle then grabbed a plastic bag and wrapped Philip's head in it. She then dragged Philip's body from the living room to his bedroom to the closet. I'm not sure how she managed to do that, but yeah, she did. And she stuffed his body into his closet. Michelle then had dinner, hastily cleaned up the scene the best she could, but she left the huge blood stain in the living room carpet. She then gathered her things, loaded them into Philip's Mercedes, and drove off. Now, when Philip didn't show up to work on base, his supervisor immediately became concerned, and he tried to get in touch with Philip, but when he was unable to, he then contacted Henry, Philip's son. And then on the night of March 7th, 1991, Henry went to his father's home to do a welfare check. When he arrived, he saw that there were no lights on and that his father's Mercedes was missing from the carport. He entered his father's home and, of course, immediately noticed the huge blood stain on the living room floor. And that's when he became frantic and started just looking everywhere throughout the house for his father. And, of course, he stumbled upon Philip's body right where Michelle had left it in his closet. Henry immediately called his wife, and at first, the two thought maybe Philip had committed suicide. They then called 911. Now, at first, police had no leads, no idea as to who could have done this. There was no forced entry, no signs of burglary or theft, and they were just at a loss. One clue that investigators had, though, was a piece of paper. It had been on the nightstand next to Philip's bed in his bedroom, and it had the name Jade Cabading written on it, along with a phone number and an address in Citrus Heights. Now, as the days went by and the story circulated in the news, some of Michelle's co-workers at the ranch, they started calling investigators and telling them that the girl Jade they were looking for sounded a lot like the Jade that they had worked with. And they also let investigators know that this Jade that they had worked with also talked about killing someone. And that is how investigators started to get on the trail of Jade, who of course they found out was Michelle Cummiskey. Now, Michelle of course had a huge head start, and so began the chase for Batgirl, as the media would dub her. Well, to be exact, it was actually Sacramento detective John Cabrera who actually came up with that moniker for her. Detective Cabrera was talking to a reporter from the Sacramento Bee, a newspaper, and the reporter was trying to find out more information about Michelle, so, she was peppering him with questions. And then, in, the course of talking with her, Cabrera told her that he was calling her, to himself, he was calling Michelle Batgirl, due to her fascination with, bats and stuff and her tattoos. And after that, this moniker just took off. Michelle Cummiskey was therefore known as Batgirl. Which, I'm sorry, what an insult to my girl Babs, man. Batgirl don't be murdering people. Now, this story was a sensation all throughout Sacramento, and the state of California, and the whole nation, frankly. True crime shows broadcast the story, and even that silly tabloid, the Weekly World News, they even ran a piece about the murdering Batgirl. Now, Michelle ended up eluding authorities for a couple of months. Michelle had different aliases that she used. She had different driver's licenses, different health papers, wigs, like all kinds of stuff where she could take on different identities. Like I said, Michelle was not a stupid girl. Not only did she have all this, documents and paperwork and stuff to, change her identity, and then wigs and makeup to physically, change her identity. She also carried a hand pistol. Like, she was not dumb. Like I said, you don't think that she prepared for the day that she would have to go on the run? Like, I feel like she absolutely did. And so she actually ended up giving authorities a bigger headache than they ever imagined. A no bail warrant was issued for Michelle's arrest on March 28th. And when her father was interviewed by police and media, he didn't believe that his daughter had killed Philip. He said that she was a typical Iowan girl who had fantasies. And he just didn't think that his daughter would kill anyone, let alone just for a Mercedes. He said, quote, "I would think somebody else was involved." He said that he had last seen his daughter a couple of years prior, when she was about 18 years old, and she visited him with her then husband Jade. And he said that she looked like a businesswoman with how she was dressed. Although he did note that when his daughter talked, quote, "She sounded like she was still 14. He said that she had returned to Iowa when she was supposedly getting a divorce before she headed back out to California. He then said that a year ago he got a phone call from her, and she had told him that this time she was in Hawaii. He said that his daughter would call him from time to time, but, quote, "I don't have that much connection to her." Now, what did Michelle do after she drove off with Philip's Mercedes? Well, she first drove to LA, and she met up with this huge escort of people, right? She met up with a lot of people, and they all took off to Las Vegas. This large group, this large entourage of people were somehow connected to the big boxing match that was ongoing in Vegas at the time. It was Mike Tyson versus Donovan Ruddock. So it was a big deal, and so that's why they all headed to Vegas to see the big fight. Later that evening, I believe after the fight and, all that, and it's the after party events, around that time, one of the men in this group of this entourage, he saw an episode of Hard Copy, and they had done a story about Batgirl. And of course, he's watching, and he immediately recognizes Michelle. It's oh my god, we're partying with this chick. Oh my god, we're partying with Batgirl. So he called up the LAPD, who then asked him to go back to the hotel room they were at to see if she was still there. And when the guy went to go check, he discovered that she was gone. She had taken off. Michelle had headed to Phoenix, and apparently she stayed over there in Phoenix for a little bit. While there, she got her bat tattoo covered on her arm. It was now just a simple band around her arm, and she had Philip's red Mercedes painted silver. She got a job at a strip club, and stripped and made friends with a girl named Crystal Annette Woodruff. The two then rented a U-Haul truck, loaded Philip's Mercedes into the back of it, and headed east towards Miami. Now, authorities had theorized that Michelle was ultimately headed to Miami, maybe even possibly the Caribbean to escape because she did have the contacts for that. And they did believe that if she made it to Miami, that she could have definitely disappeared off their radar. Like I said, she had the connections and the know-how and the funds to make it happen. So finally, 5.5 weeks later, on May 7th, Michelle, she was finally caught, right? Batgirl was finally caught, and she'd given them quite a run, guys. Yeah. She was caught in Biloxi, Mississippi. And this was after a police officer, Police Corporal Jimmy Wilson. He saw her and Crystal sitting in the U-Haul, and they were parked on some sort of beach access road by the Gulf of Mexico. And sort of in a parking lot of sorts, and they were just kind of chilling, hanging out. The girls had planned to pull over, get something to eat, maybe rest. But unbeknownst to the girls, the back door of their U-Haul had slid open. They had not secured it very well, apparently. So Officer Wilson, he's across the way, and he notices this. And he also sees the silver Mercedes inside. Now, due to his curiosity, he strolls on over and he starts questioning Michelle and Crystal. The women told the officer they were just passing through, and they were actually on their way to Miami to go work at a strip club. Now, Crystal gave the officer her ID. Michelle, who was actually driving, did not have one to give. And they explained to the officer that they were just transporting the Mercedes to Miami. Officer Wilson then asked the women, hey, is it okay if I search this Mercedes? Is that okay? And, they agreed. And so when the officer goes in the back to check out the Mercedes, he notices that the license plate is missing. So instead, he ran the VIN number on the Mercedes. And what do you know? It came back as being Philip's. It was actually the stolen Mercedes. The officer then ran Michelle's name because, of course, he brought up the whole report. And so he ran Michelle's name and came back with even more info about the elusive Batgirl. Michelle was then placed under arrest along with Crystal. There had also been a small amount of marijuana that they had found, so that's what they were initially under arrest for. Now, when Michelle was arrested, her father said that she must have been betrayed by someone she knew and someone she trusted too much. He said, quote, "It sounds like a very vicious, hateful person that would have done something like this. This is not her." Now, among some of the possessions that were found was the ledgers that Michelle so meticulously had kept throughout the years. In one entry dated January 3rd, it said, quote, "Charges $500. Payments $500. Customer name, Philip Inoffer." They also found personal diaries of Michelle's. One entry was dated March 27th, and it said, quote, "Sitting in my hotel room, I am just informed of some awful news. It seems that my sister has been very naughty, so I have to move on." Another entry dated April 9th said, quote, "He took me back to my hotel. On the way, I spotted a 6-inch hunter's knife. Then I realized it would be a wise choice to go home by myself. Knives and or suffocating will be the death of me. Father said that if you live by the sword, you shall die by the sword." And they also found the aluminum bat that Michelle had used. It was actually in the back seat of Philip's Mercedes. Now, when Sacramento detective John Cabrera was able to interview Michelle, she told him her side of the story. She said that she hurt Philip, but she did not kill him. She said that after her and Philip fought about Dana stealing from him, they made up, had sex, and then Philip took a shower. Michelle said that she did some LSD in the meantime, and that is when she started hallucinating. I read other sources that said Michelle took some LSD and then took a shower with Philip, but either way, she dropped some LSD, walked into the bathroom, and she said that she saw a monster when she looked at Philip. I think he was getting ready to get in the shower, but she said when she looked at Philip, she saw a monster. She said she saw snakes coming out of his neck. She also said Satan had told her that she needed to sacrifice Philip. She said she saw a monster and she just had to do this. She had to kill it. So when Philip got in the shower, that's when she got the knife, or knives, I'm still not clear, and she killed him. In the interview, Michelle told Detective Cabrera that she had, quote, "lost her soul" because she had taken the life of someone she loved. She said that she had red all over her and it made her, quote, "sick." She then took some towels, cleaned everything the best she could, and spent the night in the home. She said that the next day/morning, Satan told her to take Philip's car and to paint it silver because it would be a good, quote, "conductor" between himself and her. She claimed that Satan told her that he would protect her and that he wanted her to be, quote, "the best evil machine possible." She also told Detective Cabrera that she would move around as soon as she saw a story about her case on the news. She knew that that was the time to take off, and that's what she did. Detective Cabrera said that Michelle came off as very cocky, very self-assured when he interviewed her, but he did say that when she spoke of Philip and what happened to him, that she did express some kind of emotion. She was emotional. And Michelle actually stalled the California authorities when she wouldn't waive her right to extradition. She had to be extradited from Mississippi to California. But in the end, she was, of course, sent back to California to face the murder charges. Now, at a hearing in July, where a grand jury would decide on whether to indict Michelle on first-degree murder charges or not, the prosecution, led by Donald Speedy, they depicted Michelle as the cold-blooded femme fatale, someone who was cold and actively targeted a certain demographic of men and just used them for their money. And one of those men was Philip Inoffer. The prosecution alleged that Michelle actually enjoyed the fact that the cops were chasing her all across the country. Now, her defense attorney, Christy Warren, she portrayed Michelle as a scared 20-year-old girl from Iowa who had just gotten in way over her head. And Michelle certainly tried to act and look that way for the grand jury. Now, Steed argued that this airhead little, Midwestern town girl, this was just all an act. And he presented all of Michelle's ledgers as evidence of her cold, calculating nature, and used it to prove that Michelle was much more clever than she was letting on. Now, a lot of Michelle's associates, friends, co-workers from the ranch, and her 2 ex-husbands, they all testified against her as well, including Dana, who was actually promised that if she testified against Michelle, she wouldn't be prosecuted for stealing from Philip. And a grand jury came back with an indictment against Michelle on first-degree murder charges. And she was eligible for the death penalty. And the reason for that is because by California state law, because she murdered Philip in the commission of a robbery, Michelle needed to either face the death penalty or life without parole because she had committed a felony in the commission of another felony. Now, while waiting trial, Michelle really tried to bolster her out-of-mind LSD trip because that was going to be the defense. That now she was tripping balls on LSD, all right? In October, a psychiatric report from the prison that she was staying at said that Michelle was allegedly suffering from hallucinations, and she was screaming and rolling her head back and forth, side to side in her cot for no apparent reason. And Warren, her attorney, had fought and succeeded in getting a gag order for the case. She was arguing arguing that the publicity of this case was going to cause Michelle not to have a fair trial. And so this big mega story that was all over Sacramento and California and everywhere all of a sudden clammed up because there was a gag order. And because there was a grand jury indictment, like not a preliminary hearing, the public was not invited to listen in because I think grand jury indictments are not in view of the public. So yeah, all the information about this case, all the publicity just vanished overnight. And in February of 1992, Michelle's trial was delayed when the California State Supreme Court, they opted to review the grand jury indictment against Michelle. The indictment had been allowed under a new proposition that had passed. It had passed in 1990 in Sacramento. It was Proposition 115. It was the Speedy Trial Initiative. Now, previously, those charged with murder, they were granted a preliminary hearing with a municipal court judge deciding if there was sufficient evidence to go to trial. Now, preliminary hearings, they're open to the public, and defendants are allowed to present a defense. But under the new proposition, under this grand jury indictment, the prosecution was allowed to go straight to a grand jury indictment, which was not open to the public, and defendants and their attorneys are not allowed to present a defense or confront witnesses or ask any questions. Pretty much. They're pretty much not allowed to say anything. Only the prosecution is allowed to present evidence. Now, Michelle's lawyer, Warren, she had opposed the grand jury indictment and had succeeded in getting a hearing to review it. Now, at first, a Superior Court judge ruled that the indictment was admissible, and the 3rd District Court of Appeals, they refused to even hear her case. But in February, the State Supreme Court, they agreed to hear the case. And among other things that they had to review with the case, they had to review things such as if the prosecutor had to answer certain questions from the grand jury, specifically questions about evidence that they had not heard or been presented. And they also had to review whether the prosecutor had to tell the jury that they could issue a lesser charge than the one that the prosecution was seeking. And in November of that same year, the court ruled in the prosecution's favor, and so Michelle was headed to trial. However, a year later, before her trial could begin, Michelle copped to a plea deal instead. For pleading guilty, Michelle got 27 years to life in prison, and the death penalty was taken off the table. At her sentencing hearing, Michelle said, quote, "I don't blame anybody for what happened to me, but I wish I would have been taught better. Nobody is born an evil person. We all have a spark of goodness, and if it's nurtured and developed, it can grow and chase away the blackness, the negativity that's out there." She was sent to Valley State Prison for women in Chowchilla, California, and in 2011, Michelle was up for parole, which Philip's family, of course, vehemently protested against, and she was denied parole, and she was then barred from seeking parole for an additional 7 years. The Knopfer family, they wanted to be the maximum of 15 years, but it was 7 years. And then, in 2020, after serving 20 years behind bars, Michelle was granted parole, and she is currently free today. No idea, where she is, what she looks like, or anything like that. So not sure where she was paroled to, the state of California or somewhere else. Not sure. No idea what kind of rehabilitation, none at all. So hopefully she's learned her lesson. I couldn't find out a whole lot of information. The latest information I could find was, from 2020 and when it was announced that she was going to be released for parole, but I couldn't even find an article on the exact date that she was released or, what she's been up to. So hopefully she's, learned her lesson and she does feel, great guilt and understands the weight of what she did. Philip's family has said that they've never gotten over his death. Henry, it has said that he took it particularly hard because when Philip was murdered, he and Henry were just rebuilding their relationship. I guess Philip wasn't really around for a lot of Henry's childhood, and they were just trying to reestablish their relationship and get closer when he was murdered. And yeah, guys, that was the tale of Michelle Cummiskey, the murderer known as Batgirl. And yeah, I just thought this one was really wild. I think one of the reasons that we couldn't find a lot of nitty-gritty information was because, there was the gag order, and then the fact that it didn't go to trial, that she pled out. So I wonder what kind of details about her childhood that we don't know that, could they help, explain why this happened? Because, I just don't understand. She was so smart. She was so smart with this escorting business. Why wouldn't she start her own escorting firm or something? I just don't understand. understand, like, why kill? And just for, like, a Mercedes, like, girl, you've been making money, like, just ease up on the drugs and go get your own Mercedes. I just don't get it. I don't get it at all. And I really wish we would have, like, we knew, like, those nitty-gritty details, because maybe it would help explain, like, how does this happen, you know? I don't know, it's just so sad. I tried finding out more information about Philip as well, like, you know, who he was in his younger days and stuff like that, but that's just all the information that I could find out. And yeah, sorry this video was a little on the shorter side. There just, like I said, wasn't that much information out there for this case, but I just really wanted to talk about it because it was like a huge deal in the Sacramento area. But do not worry, because next week I have part 1 of our 2-parter. Yes, there's just so much information in that case. I cannot do it in one shot. I have to break it up in 2 videos. So do not worry. I've got lots and lots of content for you for the next couple of weeks to finish out the month of July. And it is a blood-boiling case. All right, y'all, that will do it for me for this week for Crime Dive. I'm going to go finish packing so we can go take our trip. And I hope you take care of yourself out there. Just remember, don't be an a-hole or a douchewad. Like, just don't be a dick, dude. Just be a decent person. All right? I know you can do it. Alrighty, y'all. I will see you here next week. Bye-bye.